Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my friends on this side of the House. I didn't hear any applause on the other side of the House. I know the House. Oh, thank you very much. And I know I'm standing in the way of the House Leader introducing another closure motion, so I'm going to use my time judiciously because, you know, as I said last night, Madam Speaker, the record of incompetence of this government is truly astounding. 19 bills have reached royal assent. Yet now they've used closure 25 times. They've limited debate more than they've passed legislation in this House. This is setting records in our parliamentary democracy, Madam Speaker. But what I said is that's actually a good thing. Because if we look at their economic performance, taking Canada from $1 billion surplus to almost a $30 billion, what seems structural deficit, even though they raised taxes on people, on job creators, on small businesses, on payroll, on carbon tax, on excise tax, on the sharing economy, on beer, on wine, they still can't balance the budget, Madam Speaker. So perhaps I should take that as a blessing that they've only been able to get 19 pieces of legislation through this House, because our country could potentially be in ruins if they were a little more ambitious in Parliament, Madam Speaker. I'm going to speak tonight, late at night, on the tyranny of the progressives. And that's what we see with this government. They have an attitude that they know what is best for you, and if you dare criticize what they're doing, you're not supporting Canada's future. Or they don't disagree with your position, they simply say you don't understand. And, you know, it's a put down to debate in this House. And I've listened to the standard speeches talking about organized crime and ridiculous arguments. You know, we have tobacco, and organized crime is still involved in contraband tobacco. So I'm shocked that the member from Scarborough Southwest and other members of their caucus would suggest that once this bill is passed, that suddenly organized crime will not have any role in the sale of cannabis. These arguments are actually detracting from a serious debate on this issue, Madam Speaker. And
red herrings, smoke and mirrors.
Last night I spoke a little bit about my friend, the House Leader, the member from Winnipeg North, and he's just given us a treasure trove of quotes, Madam Speaker, because he used to stand in this place with outrage any time there was an omnibus bill or there was closure used. Now he's the quarterback for the House Leader. You know, that gives me a treasure trove of hubris, as I called it last night. And this bill is the biggest example of how this government seems to have forgotten one of their old siren calls: evidence-based decision-making. Do you remember, Madam Speaker, in the last Parliament, how they rallied around that as third party? Let me remind my friend from Winnipeg North what he said. He said in 2012, good government policy is made when you have evidence-based policy decisions. And what did the Treasury Board Secretary then in opposition say? He even turned a witty phrase on it. He said, on a public health issue, he said there was a time when governments were guided by evidence-based decision-making. This government seems to be guided by decision-based evidence-making. Well, that's what I've just sat through, Madam Speaker, in this rush debate on marijuana. Because you know what, Madam Speaker, this government is failing with this legislation on a public health front, on a public safety front, and on the mobility of our citizens with Bill C-23, which I think is the example of the biggest act of incompetence of a government I've seen in my time in office, Madam Speaker. They've negotiated a bill on pre-clearance of custom where they're giving immigration and customs enforcement officials from the United States the ability to search Canadians on Canadian soil, yet our government, this Liberal government, could not even get one simple pre-clearance question taken out of the U.S. repertoire. Have you ever used marijuana? Because you know what, Madam Speaker? If a Canadian says yes, they can be banned from traveling to the United States. So when they had their state dinner when the Prime Minister was so busy bringing his family
That's the truth.
and the Public Safety Minister was so gosh darn excited to get tours of the Oval Office, they negotiated the most one-sided pre-clearance custom deal in the history of this country. They're legalizing marijuana, Madam Speaker, yet they couldn't even ask the U.S. to remove that one question from pre-clearance. Yet they're allowing the U.S. to come on our soil and search and interrogate our citizens. If that's not the biggest example of failure of Canadians' interests in an international treaty, I don't know what is, Madam Speaker. The other two fronts, public health and public safety, I'll also speak about. Perhaps the best quote is the editorial condemning this bill by the Canadian Medical Association, Madam Speaker. Their editorial, released a few weeks ago, said, and I quote, "The purported purpose of this act is to protect public health and safety, yet some of the Act's provisions appear starkly at odds with this objective, particularly for Canada's youth." It goes on. Simply put, cannabis should not be used by young people. It is toxic to their cortical neuronal networks with both function and structural changes seen in the brain of youth who use cannabis regularly, Madam Speaker.
That's evidence-based.
That is an evidence-based opinion of Canada's doctors. In recent weeks, Quebec, Manitoba have all asked the government to slow down. There's no ability to make sure youth are protected right now in the provincial regimes. There is no court-approved test for roadside impairment from THC, Madam Speaker. Law enforcement is not ready and is asking them to stop. Our physicians are asking them to stop. Yet, once again, the tyranny of the progressives. Tusk. They know what's better, Madam Speaker. You know, how dare we disagree? In fact, they're limiting debate on this again, Madam Speaker. Because how dare you share some of the concerns that families have about exposure of marijuana to their children? We know it harms IQ development. It can harm brain size development. And this government likes to quote Colorado's example. Colorado is using 21, Madam Speaker. Colorado's already experienced the edible problem, where young children are seeing edibles in households and are being rushed to emergency room operations.
Shameful.
The Canadian Medical Association also decries their use of home-based growing, Madam Speaker, where the THC, the medicinal benefit, is not secured and rates of use can skyrocket. Organized crime can infiltrate this home-based portion of this legislation, Madam Speaker. So what we have here is a government that made a promise when its leader was the third-party leader, with no sound evidence behind implementing the promise, in full knowledge of the fact it would violate international treaties. I'm hoping with some knowledge of the fact that they were limiting the mobility rights of Canadians who want to travel to the United States. If they say they've used marijuana, they can be banned travel. Since I've been in high school, when Mothers Against Drunk Driving was stood up 30-some years ago, we've been fighting alcohol impairment. Law enforcement have been in the front lines of that, Madam Speaker. We don't even have reliable measures, and law enforcement have said they're not ready for the increase in impairment from cannabis that they're going to see. Yet this government not only rushes through blindly, disregards the opinions of our physicians, disregards the positions of law enforcement, including the Chiefs of Police of Canada, which the member, the Parliament Trust Secretary, used to be a member of.
Long time ago.
They're also disregarding provincial partners, Madam Speaker. And what upsets me is, as a lawyer, as a dad, I want to know that we're debating these serious issues completely in this House, relying on evidence-based decision-making. And when our physicians and others are telling us to slow down, we should listen. They used closure on the assisted dying bill, Madam Speaker. And just on the weekend in the Globe and Mail, we saw how the Canadian Medical Association and doctors across the country are having trouble interpreting that law, Madam Speaker. They're rushing out of this sense that they know better for Canadians. In fact, Madam Speaker, it's a condescension towards our parliamentary democracy that's unparalleled, All we're asking for is a little more debate, Madam Speaker. All we're asking for is evidence-based decision-making, but we're still waiting. Thank you very much.